Hi, guys. I just want to say that Tom and I really have enjoyed doing these podcasts together. I hope that you've actually enjoyed it and, like myself, have actually learned things. This summer, on August 24th, we are going to do an amazing event right here at Under the Stars at Riverside in Oliver, British Columbia. We are going to do a live podcast. We're interviewing a couple of really interesting guests. We'd like to invite you to be there. I believe that you will not only enjoy it, but will be challenged and encouraged by it. So, August 24th, for more information, go to mscproject.com or to underthestars@riverside.ca. Save the date. Look forward to seeing you there.
There is absolutely nothing as powerful, as wonderful as I'll get crucified for playing around with this quotation. But there's nothing, Greg, as powerful as an idea whose time has come.
I agree.
You know, we have so many big ideas that we could talk about, and maybe we do need to talk about.
Yep.
But just judging by the tone of our last conversation on the Bible, I just figured, okay, we spoke about all this sacred literature. How do you read it? Like, how do you read it? It just feels like maybe this is, while this might not qualify maybe as a big idea, but it's just something that we needed to revisit and just have a conversation about it. How do you engage this? Because, I've heard people say, you take your Bible and early in the morning and you just open it, and wherever your eyes land, that is what God is telling you.
I've done that a few times.
See now, and I've heard people tell the joke that one person did it, and their eyes landed on the text that says, "And Judas went and hung themselves." And they were like, "Oh no." And then they opened it again and they went to the text that says, "Whatever your heart wants to do, do it quickly."
Yeah.
How do you read it? What kind of practices?
Yeah, and I think this is really an important and a practical question, because we talk about this holy scripture that we've discussed here on the last episode. We've added much value to it.
Mm-hmm.
And there is some quirky, crazy things that you read in there and you say, what on earth happened here? And how, more importantly, how does it affect my life? What's the relevance on it? And I think people can get very discouraged by opening it up and reading some really crazy stories and say, well, that may make sense back then, but I'm sorry, it has nothing to do with my life today, and they close it and they walk away, and they never touch it again, or highly unlikely they do. So I think the question you're asking is an important one, because if this thing is irrelevant to us, doesn't have anything that meets my needs, and it doesn't kind of grab onto my life, I got other things I can think about and worry about.
Yeah, so it has to be relevant. I mean, I've met people who have opened the Hebrew Bible and they've come across stories that are, and I'll say, oh, this is genocide. And they'll come across stories of violence.
Yes. And
the outcome is, no, if this is what this is about, then I want nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
And so we have to acknowledge that there are some things that are pretty hard to read in there, but we need to have the conversation on how do you engage with those things and how do you find meaning in them.
And I agree. There's some hard and difficult things, and there's some beautiful and sweet things. And I think if we look at some of the hard and difficult things, then we kind of build a platform of understanding. And so when you run into them in the future, you can say, oh, okay, this may need more information. And before I shut the book and run away, there is a background on understanding difficult portions of the scripture.
Yeah.
The easy part, I love those easy parts.
Yeah. It's the difficult parts that really, really challenge us in. And I thought, let's pick a story from the Hebrew Bible, and I'm sure there are so many stories you could pick, and let's discuss this potentially difficult story and bring up the questions that people could bring into
Yes. Yeah.
reading that story. And I thought, okay, which story can I bring here? We've done some case studies here a couple of episodes back, and which other story is worth bringing? I thought, there is one I know in 2 Samuel chapter 5. Actually, it's chapter 6 where the story takes off interestingly. So,
I think I know where you're going. I think I know where you're going. This is a difficult one.
Yes. The story of Uzzah.
Yeah.
Pronounce it Uzzah, Uzza, whichever way that works for you, I guess. Doesn't bother me. Probably bothers some people, but pronounce it whichever way you want to. The Ark of the Covenant,
Yes.
has been brought home. Right? The narrator says God has brought it home because Philistines took it and it just created havoc in their camp.
Yes. Yeah.
And so they figured out a way to send the whole thing back. They put it on a cart and they put cows, animals of labor, and those animals just pull the thing back home. And this fellow is working in his field, and suddenly the sacred box, the Ark of the Covenant, just comes, and they take it, they stow it in his house. Okay? I'm paraphrasing. David, who is king,
Yes.
decides that on this particular day, it is time to bring the ark back to where it should stay. And I'm looking at it here right now. It gives us details on how David did it. It says, and I'm reading, they loaded the ark of God on a new cart and carried it from the house of Abinadab, which is where it was staying, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, the sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart. So, cart, Ark of the Covenant, same way it came, same way they think, okay, it needs to go. And the two boys are leading this thing back to where David is taking it. And while that is happening, while David and all of Israel were energetically celebrating, there is dancing. They're enjoying themselves. There is a whole lot of laughter. There is a whole lot of singing, playing of various stringed instruments. It says tambourines, rattles, and cymbals. And they get to this one point. And it said it's by the threshing floor of Nikon. Uzzah reached out and grabbed hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. Just paint this picture, beautiful picture, I think. Well, kind of tragic, maybe. The cow stumbles.
Yep.
And the sacred box is about to fall off the cart. Maybe. And Uzzah thinks to himself, oh no, God is in trouble. I have to help him. So it says,
Yep.
he reached out and grabbed it, touched it. Verse 7 says, the Lord was furious with Uzzah, and he killed him on the spot for his negligence, this version says. He died right there beside the ark of God. Next verse says, David was angry because the Lord attacked Uzzah, so he called the place Perez Uzzah, which remains its name to this very day. And in our last episode, where we were speaking about Bible and we said, these things, there you go. That's a narrator saying to his audience, hey, it's still called that. The scribe is. So Greg, was it fair for God to kill Uzzah? Okay, we've read this. Now we're asking the difficult question. Or maybe let me ask it this way. Number one, did God kill Uzzah?
I do know that there's a dead body on the ground.
Yeah.
The way it reads, it sounds like God killed Uzzah. There's no question about it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very active event.
Yeah.
God initiates the death of Uzzah.
Yeah. And so these are the problems I think people face when they are reading these things. And they're like, oh, wait a second. This God
Yep.
just killed this fellow.
And he was trying to help him out.
And he was trying to help him out. He's dangerous.
Yep.
You can't help him. You try to help the fellow out, he kills you.
Yeah. So let me back up here.
Okay.
I there's a bit more to the story, and I think this is very important.
Okay.
You started off in a really interesting part of the story, but if you back it up a little bit further, this Ark of the Covenant was in the warehouse or the
house.
the house where the Philistines had their god Dagon in there.
Mm-hmm.
And Dagon, if I remember correctly, and help me out on this, was a god of
Oh my, yeah, I don't.
yeah, it is I believe it's an honor to a demonic god that they had manufactured. Maybe they hadn't, but it is perhaps that the history of Dagon goes back further than that generation. But he was a pagan god that the Philistines had associated with, I believe, as god of death or something like that. Anyhow,
Yeah, he was shaped like a fish.
yes,
Yeah.
okay. So Dagon is in this thing, and day one, they put the Ark of the Covenant in there.
Yeah.
Next morning, they discover that Dagon is on the ground.
Yeah.
They prop him back up. Next day, he's down again, but this time he's broken in a million pieces. He's a mess, and they say, you know what? This is not working out very well for us. So in that, and I don't know the storyline, but sooner they say, let's get this Ark of the Covenant out of here.
Yeah.
So now you have a group of people that don't understand, and they have a lot of respect for this Ark of the Covenant. Obviously, maybe somebody touched it, I'm not sure, but there's no reference on that, but they have respect for it. So they put it on this ox cart. So let's be clear. I've been involved with around farms, and I have one, and I have some other things. But I'm just saying is that the ox cart is like the turnip wagon today. And you put a couple of oxen in front. I don't care if they're in the labor or not. It's the oxen was like the old tractors, like an old Massey Ferguson 135. It's like, okay, so you got a turnip wagon, an old tractor in our term, and you put this thing on, you send it out. Well, that's a rather humiliating and embarrassing place. Today, we would not take the king or the queen or some royalty around the back of a turnip wagon through town.
Yeah, I might do it, but I'm crazy like that. Yeah,
but I'm just saying is that it would be disrespectful.
Yes.
To do that. So now we say, okay, here we have a group of people, and I appreciate this is what for me really interesting. I appreciate the fact that God looked at their ignorance, so to speak. They didn't realize what they had in this box. Put it on an ox cart, fine. Now they come to the borders of the Israelite nation at that time. They put it in the guy's house, and now David says, "Oh, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to put a new turnip wagon out there for him."
Yeah.
And so now you have the representation, the creator God of the universe, riding on a turnip wagon into town.
So are you saying that was wrong?
In my humble opinion, that's totally disrespectful because, first off, we need to understand God does not need to be hauled around in a gurney or box going down the road. He could float into town on that. I'm just saying is that there's no need to have this. But he said, okay, we're going to set it up with the Israelite nation, and when it was first given, the priests, only the priests were to handle this. So again, you have people that understood and respected the role that they had within the community, not the the sheep herder boy. This is a priest that come, and if I recall correctly, you had 6 priests on either side. So you had 12 priests that were either carrying, and I believe it was to put on their shoulder.
Yeah.
So in that world and in that time, you would have royalty would be put on a chair on people's shoulders and carried through the town. So you put the king on this, and he would go through town carried on the shoulders of his important men that would carry him.
Yeah. So basically, Greg, you're saying the whole process was done wrong.
I'm saying that this is a real big message to David. David knew better. And this is a very strong message to David is that don't bring me into town on the back of a turnip wagon.
Can I push you a bit on that?
Sure.
Is it fair for this God to punish Uzzah for the mistakes of David? Why should Uzzah pay for the mistakes of the leader? I mean, that's a question someone can come with into this and say,
Yeah. And many times, and most times, the mistakes of the leader is felt by the frontline people first. Historically, that has happened. The screw-ups of the leader, you can take David's life. We talked about Bathsheba and his involvement.
Yeah.
Who's the dead person there? Bathsheba's husband and the child. So what I'm coming to is that does necessarily the rebuttal to the leader always come directly to him? at that time and place in that culture,
Yeah.
I would argue that it isn't always the case.
See, the problem, Greg, is that the narrative that is brought, the understanding that is brought about the God that we find in the Hebrew Bible is that, like we said in the previous episode, he is pro-people. Okay? And now, if he's going to be a judge, then he's got to be a fair judge. Here, to go with your argument, David has messed up.
Yes.
Decided to do things his own way. And then this God says, oh my goodness, David, how could you do this? I'm going to punish you by killing Uzzah. Does that make that God attractive? I tell you, if that's what he is, you buy me the first ticket out of here, I'm gone.
Well, don't leave quite yet.
He's dangerous. That's what I'm saying. He's dangerous. Because what if the next thing is that he's upset at my prime minister? Is he going to strike me? Because of what my politicians are doing? So these are the difficulties that come when people read these stories. And they say, yeah, here it is. Here it is. So who is to blame for the death of Uzzah?
So as we read it, we're reading, and I'm the first to point this out, God struck him dead. In fact, there's a couple other places. For example, Samuel's sons, I think it is.
Oh, Eli.
Eli's sons
Yeah.
are in the temple with what they call...
I remember that story. They were supposed, God, I think, was supposed
strange
to...
fire, that's the term, yes.
God was supposed to bring fire from heaven.
Yes.
And they thought, the same fire we make our pancakes with will do. And then they brought it, and the narrator says they used strange fire.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And they paid with their lives, if I remember well.
Yep. So that seems a little bit harsh.
It does.
Fire is fire, after all. And would you not argue? Well, again, without knowing too much about it,
Yeah.
From a human perspective, it seems like when you put something in there, it
Yeah.
burns.
But you see, the difference now becomes that when those boys used strange fire,
Yeah.
they were punished for their action. I can see someone who is a new reader would say, okay, yeah, I mean, this God had told them not to use same fire they cook their pancakes with and use it for his stuff. A bit harsh, but it makes sense. Uzzah did absolutely nothing. David, in going by your argument, David messed up.
So I am also suggesting
Yeah.
that Uzzah probably knew that he should not be lifting the cover off or mucking with this particular piece of this box. So here we have a person, I'm going to make the assumption, that actually knew not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So his knowing should have been a strong deterrent for him not to do it. Is it not any different between the boys that brought in the strange fire? They knew better. So both cases, they knew this was wrong. Arguably, Uzzah said, I'm going to help God out.
Yeah.
And I think that is a very human thing to do. And I would argue that when we start helping God out, in our opinion, God needs our help, I think we can get ourselves down a slippery slope pretty fast.
I recall, Mr. Director, you probably have to find this for me. When the ark first came, it should be somewhere maybe in First Samuel. When the ark first came, I think the story, or maybe it's right there in Second Samuel, we're told that it was a number of years before David got to move it from where it was. Okay? So to go by that same argument, then we would have to say these boys, Uzzah being one of them, has grown up seeing this very event. I mean, you get to grow up and there's this sacred box in your living room at home.
Pretty impressive.
Okay? None of them are trained in the formalities of this box.
Right.
The text makes sure that we see that no, none of them are trained in the formalities of the sacred box. I'll keep calling it that. And so Uzzah, just following up with his dad, he's doing the best that he can, and they are leading the cows going downhill, because the story just says that the house was on a hill.
Yeah.
And Uzzah is doing the best that he can to catch this sacred box that he has grown up looking at. Like, there is no indication in the story that he knew any better.
And you're absolutely right. We can make the assumption that he was this was not a malicious act. So let me ask you: is that your understanding in the reading of languages? What are we not seeing about this story? Because to me, this is a signal or a message going back to David. That I think is a very strong one, and unfortunately, in my experience, the leaders typically are not the first ones to take the hit when something goes bad.
Yeah. I think I just found it. I think it stayed for about 20 years. I think you'd have to fact check me.
Yeah.
Okay. I think there are some lessons that we need to learn when we're reading old writings, sacred writings in this context. And I think it is true not only of the biblical material, it is true also of the other materials you read. See, in our last episode, we spoke about, say, for example, the bias of the narrator. Okay. I think that's something you need to bring to this story when you're reading about what happened to Uzzah, and you say, okay, what's the narrator telling me? What's the narrator not telling me in this case? What's the information that has been conveniently left out? Well, maybe conveniently becomes a harsh word, What's the information that the narrator has left? And what's the information that the narrator has included in this? And it sounds like the narrator tells us nothing about whether Uzzah and the rest of his family had any training in how to handle this.
And there's also one other thing. The narrator makes some assumptions about his audience that he's writing to.
Yes. The narrator has made an assumption who his audience is. Because the narrator doesn't pause long enough to even tell you that, hey, there's actually a way in which this thing is supposed to be carried. I think you have a point. Say it was stated in other sacred writings how this box was supposed to be moved from point A to point B.
Yes.
So the narrator is making that assumption that, hey, my audience knows. Okay? So you have to make that assumption. Say, okay, the narrator is assuming that I know exactly what is meant to be done.
Because he's writing to a Jewish audience.
He's writing to a Jewish audience. Interestingly enough, when you read rabbinic literature, the rabbis also struggle with what happened to Uzzah.
Excellent.
They ask very big questions, Greg. They ask very big questions. I know I've read one rabbi who said the problem with Uzzah is that, and now this is when we spoke in our last episode and we said it has to be alive. This is how alive it became to this rabbi who was struggling with it also. He said, you know what? The problem, what happened, why Uzzah was killed was that he probably stopped to relieve himself.
Yeah.
And by doing that, he becomes unclean.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is that context is key.
Yes.
It is king. You know what they say when in real estate,
Yeah.
the key idea is location.
Yep.
The key idea when it comes to reading sacred texts, sacred writings, or old writings, whichever way you want to refer to them,
Is context. Yep.
I think so. I absolutely think so. And part of understanding the context means you have to ask the question, who is the narrator writing to? Who is the narrator's immediate audience? Because it's often assumed in the text. And the strange thing, Greg, I think we do that on any other thing we read.
That's true.
So why not do it when it comes to sacred writings?
Yeah, we read a newspaper and we have the context of the story or whatever is happening on it.
Yeah.
We've heard bits and pieces before, and so now this is adding more texture, more context to it. Definitely, and we see that the news broadcasters will set up the story and show us, okay, this is again, context is half the story.
There we go. Context is half the story.
Yeah.
When I pick up, say, a copy of the Gettysburg Address, I immediately have to say in my mind, who's the audience? When is this happening? And I put all of that when I read Luther's "I Have a Dream" speech.
Yeah.
Okay, I already put myself in that time, in that space, and then his words begin to make sense.
Yeah.
I think it's important when you're reading these texts also. You need to move yourself to the time and to the audience in which the author is addressing. Then it begins to make sense. But then you also need, if we go back to our previous conversation, you also need to factor in, and this is a hard one for people to swallow sometimes, that what's the possibility that the scribe also didn't have all the details?
Yeah, it's a very good point. We're making the assumption that they had all the information, and they may be lacking, and say, "Well, okay, let's go for lunch, and we're going to finish this off quickly and take a break."
Yeah,
and I'm not trying to say that they would do that, but I'm just saying is that we have a tendency, even with as we interact, we give people the Reader's Digest version of it when somebody asks.
Yes. We do that a lot. Like I often say to people, I say, you know what, just give me the helicopter version of it. I just give me this and this. Cliff's Notes. Give me that, and that's it. And what there is a possibility also, and these are the things you factor in now, and say there's a possibility that the narrator is, give an example. I say, because of the context, the time in which we're living in, if I say something along the lines of, Greg, I'm not happy with just the population in our town. I think I'm going to build a wall.
Okay.
You laugh already because in the context of the days we've lived in,
Yeah.
you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And I think our viewers are going to know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I didn't need to describe what happened before.
No.
Why the idea of, I think I will build a wall around this city makes sense. So it is possible that the scribe just, says, oh, you know what, and then this happened, and then this happened, and, and then God killed Uzzah. But his audience possibly has a fuller narrative.
It's true. One of the things that come into play is that in the Old Testament experience, they had this sanctuary thing built, and they had different compartments and different furniture. And in that most sacred compartment was this very piece of furniture, this box, this holy box we're talking about. And there was once a year did a priest go into that room, and this is part of the understanding that the audience would have had when they would read this. And my understanding is that when that priest went in, they would typically put a cord around his foot. They had bells around the bottom of his garment, because if by chance he passed away or died, they could literally pull him out. And so what I'm coming to is that the Jewish culture and time and place, they understood this is something of extreme importance.
It's sacred.
And it's very sacred.
Yeah.
We have examples where Moses going up in the mountain, and he spends 40 days before he gets close to God. And even then, it talks about God putting his hand in front of him and putting him in the cliff of the wall. And so in reality, the fact that everybody's out singing and dancing around this is a demonstration that God has a lot of mercy for everybody in many respects. So in many respects, it's already dialed down. The glory of God is already dialed down.
I hear you. So maybe let's put it this way, that history is important.
Yes.
History plays a part in your reading and understanding of sacred texts. Okay? And there are some histories, though, Greg, that I think as you engage with them, you really have to, the historicity has to be checked, because it is easy to say something and then you go and look for it, and then you're like, oops, I guess someone just said this, for example, the issue of the rope and all of that.
Yeah.
The historicity of those events, because remember, it's not in the sacred text.
No, it isn't.
Yeah. So the historicity of it is then questioned. But see, this is part of the process of reading and understanding the sacred text. At least I think so. Where you can say, okay, what kind of history is around this?
That's an interesting question. If you understand the history, that gives you context.
Yes.
It can give you context.
It can give you context because the history will inform you on exactly what's happening. Like, for example, give an example. There's another very, I guess, painful story of a woman who gets raped. Okay, and then after she's raped by someone she's related to, she says to him, okay, now that you've done this, you have to marry me. But then the guy is not interested.
Yeah.
When you read it outside of the historical context, and it's still a bit of a painful story, why would someone ask their abuser to then marry them? This was violence. But then historically, when you go back to that place and time, and we spoke about this in our episode about marriage and all of that, Mr. Director, make sure you put a link onto that for someone who hasn't watched it. And then you're like, oh, okay, as long as I think it is coming from this part of the world at this time, it looks like the people who were there at that time, this was their everyday reality.
Yeah, and there's a couple other stories that are in Scripture that actually support what you're, that come to mind, that support that very concept that things were done dramatically different in that time and place. What even on a good day, it would be very uncomfortable for us.
Yeah, I mean, someone once said that history is a foreign country. They do things differently there.
Yeah.
And I think it's true. History is like a foreign country. They just do things absolutely different. And the way they, like, you look at it and you just say, no, that is so different. And yet that was life for them. And I think when you're interacting with this, like the story of Uzzah, let's go back to that story.
Yes.
And I have to ask myself, okay, what was the historical background to this story? When is it happening? What's the narrator telling me about when it's happening? What is normal to them at that time? What is not normal? And one of the things that I'll just put out there that is normal to them at that time is that they ascribe anything that happens to the gods.
So like Uzzah could have had a heart attack.
Absolutely. Uzzah could have...
And we would have assigned it that God killed him.
Yes. In the same way that you find it where it says, and God hardened Pharaoh's heart.
Ah, yes, yeah. That's another classic one.
Yeah. So you ascribe everything to the gods.
If you don't know, it's God gets credit for it.
Yeah, I mean, the gods were in everything. When two tribes went to war, or two, I want to call them countries, but I know that's a very modern term, when say the Philistines and the Israelites went to war, of which this story comes in the context of a previous war, it was not only us fighting them, it was our gods.
Yes, yeah. And that is a very interesting point, because there was mass conversions when the war,
yes,
at the end of the war, everybody converted over to the stronger God.
Yeah. And so when you see that in the context of, Christianity of the modern era, that is all about gaining more adherence to its flavor of Christianity, you can take that idea and put it into the ancient world, and then you say, oh, look at that. They went to war, and then all the other people joined their faith.
Yeah. Maybe.
You had no option.
Yeah.
If you lost the war, your God has lost. And so if your God has lost, you pick up at the next god, the one who's in charge now.
That's a really interesting point, because the Philistines had actually won a war against the Israelites.
Yeah.
Their god Dagon is there,
Mm-hmm.
and he's falling over in the presence of
Yeah. They take this Israelite god because they've won, they've taken him captive, and they go and put him in the temple of their god. And then drama starts happening. Well, that's the narrator tells us that.
Yeah.
You know, so it is important when you're reading it to ask yourself that question. Say, okay, what's the history there? And when you start understanding the history, then you start tapping into the language that is used. And you say, oh, okay, I see. So it is likely, as you're saying, it is possible that Uzzah had heart failure.
Yeah.
And just died there. And then the narrator, here's another historical thing, because remember, if your worldview says you should ascribe everything to God, now the narrator who has to write this story down, what happened, who has to give a report to David, because remember, he stops this whole thing. It's a tragedy. We're all celebrating here, and then this guy falls dead.
Yeah.
Okay? They have to... This is exciting for me. In the ancient world, what we have today, you know the press release.
Yes. Yeah.
They had something similar also, where an official statement, an official thing
document.
about what has happened here comes out. So if David, in a scenario, sits down with his scribes and his religious professional practitioners, and then he says, okay, what happened here? Who are they going to put the
blame on?
It's God. God killed him.
They certainly can't put it really on David, because that could be they themselves might have a short life.
Yeah. So you put it on God, because it's either the language of the day, the thinking of the day says that.
So what could have happened? I'm not saying that did happen. It could have happened that Uzzah was walking beside this thing. The oxen go down, and the very sight of this sacred box maybe sliding off the cart, he collapses and has, I'm going to say, heart attack. It dies at the very thought that this could be so tragic. And he can't handle it.
Yeah.
Or it could be the fact that he just ate way too much fatty foods the last 10 years.
Too many fries.
Yeah.
It could also be, Greg, because if I'm to put myself in that, is there someone walking around the ark investigating what's happening? And I don't know, I don't think so. The storyteller says they're dancing, this is a joyful moment, and then something happens. It could also be that someone needed to come up with a good explanation. Is it possible that really no one saw that the ox stumbled? Like it just looks like it just looks to me like something that someone would say, yeah, it probably happened. And in fact, if you read the rabbinic literature that I referred to,
yes,
the guy who says probably Uzzah stopped to relieve himself, at the call of nature. The conversation around that is that, well, the idea of the ox stumbling really does not make sense.
I agree with that, because typically oxen don't altogether stumble at the same time.
Yeah, so the rabbi looked at that and said, I'm not quite sold. But what makes more sense, he says, to me, what makes more sense is that maybe he stopped to relieve himself. And then he came back and and now look at that. He's also using his worldview of what is clean and what's unclean, and he's using that to interpret the text. Say, okay, that's probably what happened. That's probably exactly what happened. When you are reading these things, and I'll be the first one. You know what, Craig? I think this is something that's worth saying. When you are reading these texts, it's also okay to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we bring a whole lot of arrogance to these texts where we want to have all the answers. But the beauty of the text is also in the mystery of it. I should be able to say, wow, that's mysterious. I don't know.
Yeah. And it's probably the safest place to be. We can speculate on these other things.
Yeah.
We don't know.
We just don't know.
It's likely that there was more than just. So with the other thing is that we can also say is that it's out of character for God to do this.
Ah, yes. Yes.
And that itself points to the probability that there was another backstory that we're not understanding.
Yeah. And a backstory we're not privileged to.
Yeah.
It is likely that maybe the immediate audience to this story were privileged to that backstory in the same way that someone, 600 years from now in a documentary about how people used to do this old technology called podcasting. And then they'll have this clip of ours where I say, oh, too many strangers, I'm going to build a wall. And they're like, as you can see, they had strange ideas. They don't have the backstory 600 years from now. They can understand this, what I said, in a totally different way.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Because the story is missing. The backstory. The big question, Greg, is that does that diminish the message, like we said in the previous episode? Does that diminish the message, the consistency of message in the book? Even though I'm not comfortable with that, but I don't think so. What do you think?
Yeah, I feel, for me, I take a lot of comfort in the fact that even today, we will say if there's a person missing, and this is usually to do with a missing person case. It's out of the news reporters will say it's out of character for the person not to report back home or call their mother or whatever it is. They haven't received any message in the last 24 hours or 12 hours. That's out of character for that missing person to have done that. It points to something tragic or possibly tragic that has happened to it. It invokes a degree of urgency for the community to step up and go look for this child or parent or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's out of character. And I think when you look at this story, when I look at this story, this is out of character for the God I know. This is not what we have seen. So there must be some backstory that we're probably not understanding.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's a fair assumption to say that. I think it's reasonable to make the comments about the fact that this was a story told to a certain group of people that understood a lot more about how this ark should have been handled. It was not told for somebody in the future. It was told for people at that time.
Yeah. So like I said, I think the letters, the books that have been compiled to become a Bible do a great job of telling not only the story of humanity, but also the story of God. Okay. And I think it's true of all the other ones also, I think ultimately I've shared this with you. All truth is God's truth.
Yeah.
Okay. But human communication is not a perfect science.
Yes. Yes.
It's not.
No. And even with people, husbands and wives, it's not perfect communication.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you come home, you say, honey, how has been your day? And she says, okay, what do you want now? Like,
Yeah. There's assumptions made.
there are assumptions made. Lots of them. Communication is so, and yet I think people should not fear to engage with these things. I think what happens is that when we take away the complexities of these things we're reading, when we say no, what you see in there, that's it. You don't have to believe anything else. That's it. We narrow it down, and it starts to dissolve the complexity, and we don't want that. I think the complexity is a part of the beauty of what we're reading. You should be able to read something and say and experience a broader range of human emotions. It's okay to read and say, that is shocking.
Yeah.
That is sad. That is mysterious. I don't get that. Oh, and I get this. I think that's part of the process. Because you are reading the story of humanity, and at some point you'll be able to look at yourself and you say, you know what? My life and my story is as complex as the stuff I am reading there.
That's true.
I'm just a whole ball of questions sometimes, Like, why is this? Sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm sad. Sometimes I have events happen in my life where I have no answers. So what better book than these sacred texts that explore everything that I am?
That's an interesting idea, because it also says that there's times in my life I have seen things that it looks like God did that don't make sense.
Yeah.
And I've struggled with that. I said, what were you thinking, God? And what is your thinking? And I don't have answers. I read stuff like this and I say, I resonate with this. This doesn't make sense, God.
Yeah.
And yet what you're saying, I think, is really, that's okay, because it just says it's another layer of complexity, another layer of intrigue,
Yeah.
and another layer of sophistication that we are only seeing a small portion of the reality of that time. And I think that's the same thing with us today. I'm only seeing a small portion of all the things that are happening around me, and what I see doesn't make sense. And I think I need to take that position and say, okay, there is things that I don't make sense in my life, much like this story of Uzza.
Yeah.
But I'm still okay with that.
Exactly. But I'm still okay with it. Because there are things that really don't make sense.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is a safe place to be.
Yeah.
I really think so. And this, I mean, we spoke about this because it has been an, what's the technical term, an addendum to our previous conversation on the Bible and sacred texts. I want to invite our viewers, firstly, to subscribe, because just look straight in the camera. This helps. When you subscribe, it helps this channel. It helps not only this part of what we do in the MSC project, it helps the entire package, because you go to the mscproject.com, you'll see that we have the podcast, we have all these other things that are happening there. We have, a blog where you can read so much. We have so much happening, and
more things happening.
And we ask that you get involved. Just get involved. Begin by subscribing. You have ideas you want to contribute, reach out to us.
Yeah.
Reach out to us and let's talk about it.
Yes, I would love to hear what people want to have discussed.
Yeah.
Because I have a whole bunch of things I want to discuss. What they to discuss?
Yeah.
So,
And the people, you probably have a project you're passionate about, you want to be a part of and see it get done. Hey, reach out to us. Just reach out to us and let's talk about it. Let's see what the MSC project can do for you to bring that project to life. And I'm asking to make this a reality. Like, subscribe,
share.
And then on the comments, please talk to us. How do you read the sacred texts in your life? I would like to know.
I would too.